While it may not have invented the trope, Gundam absolutely popularized the inexperienced teenage protagonist does war things for fun and profit cliché. For the most part, it works just fine, allowing the viewer to experience the story of the show from a relatable vantage point. Take, for example, Banagher Lynx, the primary teenage protagonist of Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, whose name I had to look up the spelling of no less than 3 times while writing this. A student studying at Anaheim Electronics Industrial College at the Colony Industrial 7, he has a fateful encounter one day with a green-eyed girl falling from the sky.
Stop something. What is it?
A war.
Now, these small expositional details are easy to miss, I know, but fortunately, the producers were aware of this and corrected this oversight by reminding viewers of both of these things before the start of every episode of the show's TV re-release, Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn Re:0096. Once he inevitably saves said green-eyed girl from the sky she was falling from, inside a centrifugal space station, mind you, additional exposition happens that eventually leads to Banagher and his deadbeat dad, Cardius Vist, being reunited. And to make up for not being around when he was growing up, probably, he gives Banagher a present. The full Psycho Frame Prototype Mobile Suit RX-0 Unicorn Gundam. The Unicorn, let's not mince words here, is a weapon of genocide. No, really. Aside from the typical armaments, beam sabers, rifles, and the like, it's also fitted with a new system called an NTD, or New Type Destroyer. Basically, when the suit detects a new type nearby, which, as I've mentioned in a previous video, are basically humans adept for space and also kind of mutants, but not really. It's complicated, but when the suit notices one, it wigs out for a sec and turns into a candy cane. A really angry, murderous candy cane. It will try to kill any new types in the immediate vicinity until its 5-minute timer runs out. Unless, ironically, there's a new type piloting it, in which case the pilot can think real hard and cancel it out. So we have a big-ass robot with plot armor provided by a teenage protagonist and a dash of space magic. What's not to like? Well, there's a couple of things. First, I do not like the design. I just don't. And I know I'm in the minority here. Look, this is a suit that's popular enough to replace the legendary RX-78 as the 1-for-1 scale Gundam outside Gundam Front Tokyo coming in 2019, but I mean, just look at it. It's way too busy, like, not even in a good way, just really busy. Sure, there's bigger suits out there with more going on, looking at you, Dendrobium, but all the extra lines and creases and edges make this thing look more at home in a certain Michael Bay franchise than in Gundam, in my opinion. Big suits like the Double Zeta, for example, feel like there's a purpose to the bigness. With this, there's no point to the extra lines and creases in most places, since so many of them aren't seams in the armor for when the NTD kicks in. And sure, the NTD is a nice gimmick, I'll give it that. But the end result makes it look, as I said, like a giant spacefaring candy cane. Not to mention the system starts to push the boundaries of real robot versus super robot in anime, but that's another incredibly nerdy video entirely. But beyond the shouty design, beyond the fairly plain armaments and the ridiculous-looking NTD system, there's a bigger problem. It's the underdog, piloted by a child with no military experience, and it's decided to pick a fight with a deadly rival. The MSN-06S Sinanju. A big, red, mono-eyed world slayer piloted by a man whose name makes for a very risky Google search, Full Frontal. The Sinanju comes equipped with largely the same weaponry as the Unicorn. Vulcan guns, beam sabers, a beam rifle. It does have a badass beam axe, however, because of course it does. It also has a busy design, but one that's consistent with the Xeon design language. And it's red, which is just better. Interestingly, it gets its name from a fictional Korean martial art from the cult paperback book series The Destroyer by Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. It was originally developed in tandem with the Unicorn as the Sinanju Stein, but when the Neo-Zeon remnant group The Sleeves stole it in UC 0094, they chose to replace the Fetty stuff with Zeon stuff and paint it red. Unicorn, Sinanju. These two clash multiple times in Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn. Their battles are some of the best in the Gundam franchise, eventually leading to the climactic encounter with the Sinanju's impossibly massive upgrade, the Neo-Zeong. It's a classic tale of scrappy underdog with a shiny new toy versus big red villain. So, where have we heard this story before? Frankly, a lot of places actually. David vs. Goliath stories are as old as storytelling itself. But for this build, there's a real-world version of this story that I'm drawing my inspiration from. And as with the Bull Bernard Martini, my muse once again is the Crucible of Motorsport. The year is 1964, either 213 or 177 years before the events of Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, depending on who you ask. The 12th season of what was then called the FIA World Sports Car Championship is underway, with every team focused on June 20th and 21st, Round 9, the 24 hours of Le Mans. Okay, so before we go any further, I'd like to add some context as to why we're talking about auto racing again in a Gunpla video. I like having my serious builds have a story behind them, and if all goes well, we're gonna have two awesome rival mobile suits inspired by one of the greatest sports rivalries of all time when this is done. The Scuderia Sinanju Ferrari and the Ford Unicorn GT40. The scope of this project is pretty big and partially dependent on a kit that isn't even out yet, so I wanted to take several minutes of your time to introduce you all to the inspiration for these builds. Also, since this is a Gunpla channel, you may not know or care about what a Le Mans is, so here's the Cliff Notes version. First run in 1923, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is one of the most prestigious races in motorsport, and is still run to this day. It has been held every year near the town of Le Mans, France, except in 1936, when there was a workers' strike. And between the years of 1940 and 1948, France was rather busy with a certain large war at the time. Unlike NASCAR or Formula One, endurance races like Le Mans are based on duration and distance rather than simply a number of laps. As the name suggests, the 24 Hours of Le Mans takes place with cars trying to cover as much distance as possible around Circuit de la Sarthe in 24 hours, with the driving handled by 2 or, in more recent years, 3 drivers. There are also multiple classes, such as the bonkers prototype classes, which essentially means that there are multiple sub-races happening alongside the overall event, all on the same track, all at the same time. Alongside insane machines that were never meant for normal people like us, you have Porsche, Alfa Romeo, Chevrolet, Aston Martin, Audi, Nissan, and of course, Ferrari. Ferrari was the undisputed king of Le Mans in the 60s, winning the event 6 years in a row. 1 year prior, in 1963, Ferrari was on the verge of becoming part of an American automotive manufacturer, Ford. You may have heard of them. Enzo Ferrari, the guy running the place, pulled out of negotiations for the merger just as the deal had appeared to be done. Henry Ford II, of Edsel fame among other things, was nonplussed. So he did what all reasonable Americans do whenever they're mad at someone about a thing. He pumped a large sum of money into a petty revenge scheme. Henry Ford the sequel initiated the GT40 program in direct response to Enzo Ferrari abandoning merger negotiations, just so that he could upstage him at Le Mans, where he and his team had been dominating for years. It's a fascinating story that I can't wait to share more of with you as the series goes on, but for now, we'll just focus on the Ferrari. and that gorgeous Italian red. Certain colors are as famous as the brands they represent, and Ferrari red, or Italian red for copyright reasons, is no exception. You can buy it pre-mixed from many different manufacturers, but for this build, we're going to make our own. The Sinanju is already pretty close to the same shade, but since we're going to be painting the black parts of the kit white, leaving parts unpainted will just make the kit look unfinished. So what makes Ferrari red? It's pretty simple, actually. Here is my highly scientific method for creating Ferrari red. First, start with a generous helping of red. Then add in a dollop of yellow. If it looks too orange, add a bit more red. If you do want something a little bit more scientific, about a 70-30 mix works very nicely. Just like that, you have Ferrari red. In case you don't believe me, here's some of my Ferrari red compared to standard red. And some Mr. Color Super Italian red. The more attentive of my viewers may have inferred then that I have a pot of ready-to-go Italian red, so why make my own? Well, because I hand paint, and no matter what I've tried, the Mr. Color stuff just does not like me. It either gums up my brushes or runs too thin and doesn't set nicely. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong, so feel free to leave a comment, but for this build, I'll be sticking to good old Tamiya acrylics. For those of you who want specifics, I'll be using X-7 red and X-8 lemon yellow. Just last week, Bandai confirmed that they will be releasing an RG Unicorn sometime in the near future, and I just so happen to have the infamously finicky RG Sinanju sitting in my backlog. 2 rival suits, 2 rival rivalries. We're going back to racing rivalry with 2 of the best looking rivalries in motorsport history, from one of the biggest rivalries ever. I'm more than a little excited to get started now on the Sinanju, and as soon as the RG Unicorn drops, we'll pick up where we left off with some more bad Gunpla. We'll get started with the actual building next time.